All right. So I was asking you guys in the chat console if you guys had anything you wanted to share, any stories, any if you did anything fun, any new website or anything on your personal time, but a lack of response either means y'all aren't seeing the chat or y'all have nothing to share. I hope it's the former. But either way, yes. Oh, congratulations. That's good. All right. So let's just have a quick recap of last week. Oh, you guys are seeing this screen, don't? All right. So last week, essentially, we were going through some of our hosting options. So we're trying to have an appreciation for hosting, the different options and the different advantages to any of these options at any time. Um, I would have pointed out that um, I would have pointed out that I'm sorry. All right. I would have pointed out the different kinds of hosting, the different advantages and disadvantages. Let me just bring over this document quickly. All right. All right. So we just went through the different aspects to, what do we need to put a website on the internet? So we need domain names, and we went through how we would go about registering a domain name. We can go through registrars. So you have name.com. You have others. Yeah, it doesn't make sense to try to list them out. You can go through a registrar and just buy the name. And then you have all-in-one services like GoDaddy, HostGate, or Bluehost. And I would have given you a tour of Bluehost. And those guys allow you to basically buy a domain, buy your hosting, and they do the whatever wiring up. So if you buy the domain by itself and the hosting by itself elsewhere, then you have to do some amount of configuration in the backend to get them to see each other. Because remember that the domain name is just an address or something that should now reveal files that are in the hosting. Right. So in other words, you need to allow the domain name to point to the IP address that is hosting the files, or the IP address associated with whichever server is hosting the files. And that is how you would go about setting that. All right. So, and then you have CMS, content management systems. You'd have to say CMS systems, but you have content management systems that do the hosting for you altogether, and you can just pay your money and you say this is what you want as your name, and you don't have to do any configuration, whatever. No worry about hosting, not worry about even physical HTML files. Right? Uh, give me a moment, please. Sorry about that. I had to deal with something. All right, so sorry, where was I? Content management systems like Squarespace, or WordPress.com. So you have the open source version, which is WordPress.net, where you go and you download the files manually. And you have WordPress.com, where you just go, select a template, pay the money for the template each month, tell them what you want the website to be named, and they can just generate the stuff for you. And then you literally don't have to you don't have to worry about much more than that. You just drag and drop and build your site, if even that much. Recently, I've been building something for somebody on Squarespace. It has its pros and cons. I mean, as somebody who likes to write the code, it feels like lazy work for me. You know? But I mean, you have people who make a living out of building websites solely on Squarespace because at the end of the day, there are people who don't understand how it works and would much rather be guided by somebody who says they know what they're doing. You know? So, all right. So we went through what whois.com is. Whois is really a domain lookup service. So if you wanted a website, trevorwilliams.com, and you realize it's taken, you can go on Whois, look up trevorwilliams.com, and then they will show you who owns it. Went through domain privacy, where when you're actually buying your domain name, they ask you if you want to if you want to hide your information because it will be actually exposed to everybody who looks up your website on whois.com. So without domain name privacy, whatever you put in when you're buying the domain as your information, that will be displayed publicly. However, with the protection, the privacy, they will just display the information for the company through which you bought the hosting. So if you bought it on GoDaddy without privacy, then they will see your information, your address, your number, everything. Right? Which I mean can come in handy if I need to call you and then maybe you bought the domain name that you know is popular. And this is some people do. They buy the domain names that are popular and then wait for people who probably are going to need the domain name and then sell it back at a nice high price. Right? So you end up paying $5,000 for a domain name because it's close to your business name. All right, so people tend to do that. So I don't think they would use domain privacy because they would want it to reach out to them. But then a business may not necessarily want their information out there like that, so they'll use the privacy. All right. So, like I said, it shows up all of the information or as much information as you put in about who owns it. All right. So you have this complexity sometimes when you want to transfer domains. So sometimes you'd have bought the domain one place and then or you have the hosting on another place, or you were using one web host initially and you weren't satisfied, so you want to move it over to another web host. All right, so that's one of those things that you probably want to look out for. Part domains versus that whole domain. I had to move over one from I can't remember from where, but to Bluehost. So it required me to know my Bluehost name servers. Usually the hosting company will let you know these things. That information will always be furnished. If it's not, then the company they're probably shady. But it's usually furnished, and um you can just go ahead and point the domain name at the external server to the name servers of the destination or the new destination. At least that's if you want like a reroute. But sometimes you want to transfer ownership, and that's a matter of the billing department, really. That doesn't take much configuration when it's just a transfer. All right. So just remember that DNS stands for domain name service, which is just the human readable address that points to, or the human readable form of an address that points to a computer friendly IP address. All right. And the DNS is the glue that connects, well, the domain name to a web server. All right. So, well, the DNS is really the mapping. Um, So yeah, let me backtrack a bit. The domain name service, the DNS, is usually the server or suite of services that maps your domain name to an IP address. So the domain name would be your words, and the IP address represents the machine, or in this case, the web server. So the domain name server or domain name services now is like just a lookup library to say when you type in google.com, what IP address is google.com mapped to? Okay, point to that machine. So that's what the DNS really is. All right. And here we see the anatomy of a URL. We have the protocol, which can be HTTP, FTP, or HTTPS. And usually it's S when you have on an SSL certificate. And I made a point before that you don't ever want to use your credit card or any form of online payment. You never want to do that in a way to, sorry, you don't want to expose your payment information on a website that is not using an SSL certificate or HTTPS. Similarly, if you want any credibility, if you're running an e-commerce site, SSL is a very, very good, is a good suggestion. Right? So always look out for that. The subdomain www dot, and sometimes you have other subdomains like you have, and the example I would have cited would be vmwealth.vmbs.com. VMwealth is a subdomain. The domain name in this case, howinteractivedesign.com. Or in the other example with VM, it's vmbs.com. And then the file path is just saying, okay, which folder should I point to, or which specific file should I point to? And we would have already gone through when we were configuring our servers, would have gone through the fact that if you have a folder, then it's going to see it as a sub website on the server. And you should always have the very first file as index.html at minimum. All right. If it's PHP, index.php, and if it's ASP.NET, it's usually default.aspx. All right. I mean, in index.html works across the board. All right. But each language has their language specific pages, and so it's good to have an appreciation of which one for each. All right. So here are some more examples of host names, which, I mean, we're all internet users, so we've seen pretty much all of them. I would know by now that naming convention wise, you don't use, I think the only special character that's accepted is a dash or hyphen. Of course, we want it to be as catchy and relevant to the content as possible. And you can use dots to separate each subdomain or each section of the website. All right. And here's an example of that name server thing I was talking about. So it points you to the name servers, which then do the mapping to the hosting. All right. So here's an example. We have each host name, and we have, it's an A record. So you have different grades of records. I think, again, A record directly maps to the IP, and you can set up B records, which map to A records pretty much. So you have a whole hierarchy of records. If anything, I can find a more detailed description and share in the folder with you guys. The details elude me right now, but it's some pretty interesting stuff. But generally speaking, the A record point is what maps directly to the IP address primarily. All right. Here we have host name, CNAME, and mix. All right, so the host name, the primary one, is known as the A record. All right, so the CNAME record is what points to the A record. So it's like an alias for the A record, because at the end of the day, the A record is already mapped to an IP, so you can now map subnames or nicknames to this A record. So it will always resolve to that one IP. And then MX records are usually used for mail exchange servers. All right, so I think like Gmail zone is SMTP, smtp@gmail.com or no, it's not mail.gmail.com. I think it's smtp.gmail.com or something like that. But generally speaking, you can use these Exchange servers as your SMTP endpoints if you have to build around it. Yeah. So TTL meaning time to live. You guys are networking experts, so you guys should know that out of the box. All right. And generally you want to tweak that to ensure efficiency when your website is loading, because the last thing you want is a website to load and paint is when you see it coming down slowly. No one wants that. You don't want that for your website, and nobody wants that for their experience on your website. All right. So we get to the web host, and we can just go through this quickly. So the web host resells servers or hosting services. All right. You may not have the capital to set up a whole hosting environment, nor do you have the guarantee of uptime. And in the last class, would have pointed out some of the kinks, especially trying to do that here in Jamaica with JPS and the threat of hurricanes, etc., etc. So you generally want to outsource that aspect to somebody who has the spending power and can guarantee you certain things. Three key types of web hosts are shared, dedicated, and cloud. So shared hosting is when they resell you one server, and if you look at the picture examples, you see we have aquariums, and you see you have many aquatics coexisting inside aquarium at the same time. So evidently they all have to share this space. They all can swim, but they all have to share this space. And as a result, one fish just can't get up and say, okay, I want to partition this cage or this aquarium, sorry. You can't just do that because then it would affect the rest of them. So that's one of the downsides with shared, is that you have less control. You have many other people, so evidently you have less control. And if you have many people, then resources are going to be shared, and so that can affect the performance. But ultimately, it's usually the most affordable option. So going with that, if you have small business website or one for informational purposes, you probably would need more than that. But beyond that, you may want more control. So you probably wouldn't want to go with that option. All right. Then we have dedicated hosting, which pretty much they give you your own server, but then even then it's really not yours. It's still it's still limited. So there are still limitations to it. If you're looking for full and total control and autonomy, there are still limitations to that aspect of the hosting. But if you need more control and the ability to tweak stuff at will, then this could be the option for you and your growing business. Let me see the example I had for it. All right, so you get a one fishbowl for yourself, and you can put in your plant and your seashells as you wish, but you may not be able to move move too far. There's still restrictions. Then we get to the mighty cloud hosting, which is being touted as next gen and this and that, and yet still feared by the masses. So cloud hosting has a mix of benefits. It's very powerful and reliable. Um, Most cloud providers have very robust service level agreements, or SLAs for short, and guarantees. And of course that makes them very reliable. It's generally fast, but I mean, slow internet slows down everything. So it's almost a moot point to debate speed on cloud as opposed to anywhere else, because the fact is you have to access over the internet. And I mean, it's very robust. They give you a whole data center like experience, allowing you to confidently conduct your business and complete what you need to do. All right. So ultimately, much like with a car, you get what you pay for, right? You buy a Prius. If you buy a Prius, you're going to get a nice little electric car that's probably can't go 0 to 80 in less than a minute. Cool. You pay for a BMW M series, you shell out the money, but if speed is what you're looking for, then you get speed. So ultimately, that's exactly how cloud hosting is. Is either you want something simple to get from point A to B or host a small website, or you want something, more powerful. And I mean, we have different ranges. So like me, I drive a Swiss Sport. I Is everybody hearing me now? I'm sorry. My finger touched the mute button on the mic. What was the last thing I said? Or what was the last thing you heard? Hmm. Right. Sorry. I was in the process of saying that I drive a Swiss Sport because I was determined to make sure that I got a Sport, not a regular Swift. Swift. Suzuki Swift Sport. Yeah. So I was just running that parallel to say that in assessing your needs for hosting, just make sure you do your research and you know what your needs are, what the business needs are, what your pocket can manage, and you make the right decision thereafter. All right. So, I mean, email has to be hosted as well. Usually, you see the X or um, one moment. All right. So usually you see X. Yeah. Come to think of it, you always see some form of X somewhere. All right. Mailing servers are usually very, very demanding. So that's not something that you want to share your web hosting on, right? So, Jerry, are you hearing me? Is everybody hearing me? Hello? Oh, I see my map moving. All right, all right. So, all-in-one hosts usually offer everything one time. You go in, you register your domain. I don't. All right. So all-in-ones would allow you to go straight through with very little configuration and get all of these requisite services up and running. All right. So, in looking to go to the internet, it's good to have a strategy, as with most other things in life. All right. But you want to separate three things implementation wise and spending wise because they're actually three different um, bits of money. Sometimes email and web hosting are put together, but sometimes they separate the costing. All right. So as with everything, shop around. Um, do your research and know exactly what your needs are versus what your budget is, and assess them for the strengths and weaknesses. Um, and here you see a list of some hosting sites for different options. So Bluehost, they have Rackspace, which is, I know Rackspace to be cloud hosting. I don't know it to be web hosting. So probably it does web hosting, or is it that it does only dedicated web servers, dedicated hosting as opposed to shared? I've never used Rackspace before though, so I'm not really one to answer many questions about that. All right. So pretty much that's it. For the recap. So today I want to explore different ones. So last time I gave you a small tour of Microsoft Azure Cloud. I want to give you a small tour of the other ones. Um, AWS. I don't have an AWS account, at least not anymore. I was fiddling around with one that I've used in the past named Heroku. You have another one named Firebase, but they're all, at least all of those that I just listed are cloud. We went through Bluehost last week, which offered either shared or dedicated. So you can always just rewatch those videos to see, what the interface looked and stuff. And then we should have by now signed up for webhost.com. All right, so today we'll look at actually setting up a website via FTP on webhost.com. And if time permits, which I'm sure it will at this rate, we will also look into content management systems, what they are and how we would go about configuring one. All right. So Sheldon is telling me time. Yes, I have less than a minute, so I'm going to kill this and then resend the link. All right. So stay tuned.